Yeah. Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. I'm a headliner.
What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there today as we're talking about Week 17 quarterbacks that we're going to start and sit for the Fantasy Championships. That's what I'm talking about. Now, some of you are out there playing in Week 18 Championships matchups, and that's going to suck for you next week. I'm just saying that ahead of time, but try to change that for 2022. Don't be playing fantasy football in the last week of the season. It's a huge nightmare. So we're looking at Week 17, and before we get into all the matchups here this week, we're going to go through and see how we did in Week 16, but I also want to say this. When it comes to the fantasy playoffs, when it comes to the championship game, you start your studs, right? You run what you brung. You go with the guys that got you there to begin with. You don't want to try to get too cute, too crazy here in a week like this. It's just not worth it. And at the quarterback position, there's so many good options every single week. But I also want to make sure that I'm looking for teams that are playing for something, right? There's a few teams out there that are still in that playoff hunt. They're fighting to make it into the playoffs. Those are the teams that you really want to focus on if you're trying to make a difficult decision. Now, like I just said, before we get into Week 17, we're going to see how we did here in Week 16 first. And if it wasn't for a few outliers, we would have absolutely nailed Week 16. Now, the 29 quarterbacks we gave a start or sit designation to that played this past weekend, 23 of them were correct for an accuracy percentage of 79%. And some of our bigger misses, Zach Wilson, Davis Mills. I mean, come on, people aren't starting them on a weekly basis anyway. Tua was a miss. Some of the bigger hits, though, Joey B, Joe Burrow going out and throwing for over 500. How's that sound? And Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott had himself a huge week as well. But now is the time where we focus on Week 17. We go through every matchup and try to find the best matchups here for this week. Now, there's no Thursday night football. There's no Saturday night football, which means we are going to start directly hip thrusting into Sunday football, kicking off with the Atlanta Falcons and Buffalo Bills. And on the Falcons side, we'll kick it off here with Matt Ryan, who is currently streaking. But no, not in a good way. It's not a good way. It's been 7 games now without 300 yards passing or 2 touchdowns. That is just not going to cut it, especially here in the fantasy playoffs. Now, over those last 7 games, he's quarterback 25 overall. Even the likes of Trevor Lawrence and Cam Newton, they have more fantasy points over that span than does Matt Ryan. That's just like an immediate red flag. Not going to be worth it here this week, especially in a matchup going up against Buffalo. In Buffalo, not going to tempt that. We're going to sit ourselves some Matt Ryan. The exact opposite on the Buffalo side, though, right? We have Josh Allen, currently the #1 quarterback overall in all things fantasy, and they're still kind of in a must-win mode in Buffalo. They can't back off. They have to continue to keep their foot on the gas and move forward. Atlanta allows right around 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but like usual, we're starting ourselves some Josh Allen. Now we head over to Chicago for the Bears and the Giants, and really the only question here is Justin Fields. Does he play or not? He's really the only quarterback worth a crap in this matchup, if I'm being completely honest. Nick Foles didn't play bad. The ceiling just isn't there for Nick Foles, and he's not the type of guy that can go out there and give you that good performance to really catapult you to a championship. That's something that Justin Fields could do. Is he somebody that I want to rank high and say he's an automatic must start? No, he's more of a quarterback 2 option, and he's probably going to be questionable for majority of the week. We may not even know until the weekend whether or not he's going to play. So like I said, he's somebody we're going to monitor here throughout the week. If he's 100% full go, he'll be a start for me, but he's not going to be super high in my rankings just due to the risk in that lineup. The Giants do allow right around 18 fantasy points per game, though, so the matchup isn't all that bad for New York. Hell nah. Jake Fromm, Mike Glennon, no production. It doesn't really matter who is under center there in New York. It's not going to be somebody you want to start in fantasy football. Nobody is taking that risk. In fact, I want to know down below in the comment section, do you know anybody who's starting a quarterback for the Giants? Because if you do, that's the type of guy you want to play against because he probably really sucks at fantasy football. Which takes us over to Cincy for the Bengals and the Chiefs, my Manscaped matchup of the week here to watch for the quarterback position. And just a reminder, even though Christmas is over, that doesn't mean you still can't go to manscaped.com and get yourself something nice, fellas. I'm giving you a discount. You can go there and clear it up with your significant other. Say, listen, I'm saving us some money. Jake, my buddy over here, gonna give me a discount of 20% off and free shipping. All I gotta do is use the promo code Headliners at checkout. We're good to go. I'm still saving us some money. Find yourself something nice. Plenty of options over there at manscaped.com. So make sure you check that out. But back to this matchup of the Chiefs and the Bengals. We got two quarterbacks that are capable of going up and putting up 500 yards passing. We just saw that last week from Joe Burrow. And Cincinnati right now, playing really well, and they need to continue it. They have to continue to win ball games to make their way into the playoffs. Kansas City allows right around 19 fantasy points per game, fourth most in the NFL. The way that this offense is clicking in Cincinnati, at times they're getting all three of these stud wide receivers going with Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. This could be a potential shootout with Patrick Mahomes. We're going to definitely start Joe Burrow. As for Patrick Mahomes, he's heating up at the right time. Now, 3 straight games with at least 2 passing touchdowns. That may sound like that's not that big of a stat, but when you go back and look at the rest of Patrick Mahomes' season, there was a stretch in there where we were getting pretty worried, right? Well, he's getting hot at the right time. He should have his weapons back with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce back in the mix. They're going to have to keep pace with Joe Burrow and the Bengals. Like I said, potentially a shootout, and we're going to start ourselves Patrick Mahomes once again. Now to Tennessee now for the Titans and Dolphins, and oh, what a difference a healthy A.J. Brown makes for Ryan Tannehill. Week 16 was easily Ryan Tannehill's best game in a month. These are two teams fighting for their playoff lives, so they have to continue to keep their foot on the gas. And these are the type of games where the studs step up. AJ Brown. This has got to be a big week for them in Tennessee. Now, Miami allows right around 18 fantasy points per game. And even though I think Ryan Tannehill has an opportunity to play better this week and really build some momentum, he still isn't what I would call safe as a fantasy football start here this week. So he's going to be a sit for Miami. Just imagine if Tua could really get someone else going besides just Jalen Waddle. Now, don't get me wrong. Jalen Waddle is going to be a stud. People thought we were absolutely crazy this offseason when we said that Waddle was better than Devontae Smith in the NFL here this year. Look what this kid is doing. But also imagine if Brian Flores didn't go out there and run the ball 30-plus times a game, which could really raise that ceiling for Tua. Now, the Titans are way easier to throw on than they are to run on, allowing over 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. In my opinion, Tua is going to be a start. A little bit lower down the rankings, he won't be a top 12 guy, but with this opportunity he has this week in this matchup, is still going to be a start. Over to Indy for the Colts and the Raiders. And do we have Carson Wentz this week? Now, with the new protocols in place where it's only 5 days to quarantine, depending on when he tested positive, could have an opportunity to play this Sunday. It depends whether he had symptoms, when that test was. A lot of factors go into it. And we're waiting to get final word at the time of this recording. We have not heard as of yet. So since we don't know, I'll put it this way. Wentz plays, I don't mind starting him here this week going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. He's shown some consistency and he's got plenty of weapons in this offense. Plus, Jonathan Taylor could run wild and take a screenplay 80 yards to the house to really give him that safer floor. Now, if it's not Carson Wentz, then we're looking at Sam Ehlinger. And do I really want to start Sam Ehlinger in his first ever NFL start against the Raiders? I hope you know the answer to that. The answer is no. We're not going to start a rookie in his first ever game in our fantasy championship. I think you know that this week. Now, for the Raiders and Derek Carr, kind of similar to Ryan Tannehill, right? He hasn't thrown for 300 yards in a game since Thanksgiving and hasn't had multiple passing touchdowns in a game since week 10. They're just too dink and dunk in this offense. Now, we love Hunter Renfrow because he's racking up those receptions underneath. They're not really utilizing the deep ball down the field. They haven't had Darren Waller. Indianapolis allows right around 19 fantasy points per game, which is 8th most. But due to the inconsistencies here over the last few weeks, I can't trust it. It's too big of a risk, and I'm going to have to sit Derek Carr. Which takes us over to New England for the Patriots and the Jags. And last week we saw Trevor Lawrence play another rookie in Zach Wilson, and now we get to see the same thing here this week with Mac Jones. But let me ask you this. Do you trust Trevor Lawrence on the road in New England in December when New England has to win the ballgame? That's my thoughts. Exactly. No, you don't trust him. So we'll see you in 2022, Trevor. I do trust Mac Jones a whole lot more, though. New England, like I said, needs to keep winning ball games. They're going to be at home, and the Jags allow over 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Plus, Jacksonville struggles against tight ends, and Mac Jones has plenty of those options going around to really boost and give him that safer floor. He's going to be a start, not super high in my rankings, but a start nonetheless. Now we head over to New York for the Jets and the Bucks, and apparently Tom Brady without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is a little bit more average, I guess you could say. Now, does he get back Mike Evans this week? In my opinion, that's going to be a long shot for him to return with that hamstring injury here this week. Tampa Bay should be getting back Brashad Perryman, though. You can pair him up with AB and Gronk, still gives Tom Brady plenty of options. Plus, they're going against the Jets, who allow over 18 fantasy points per game. We're going to start Tom Brady once again this week. For the Jets, You're seeing kind of the game slow down a little bit here for Zach Wilson. Now, does that mean that he's good to go? Fire him up in fantasy football? Heck no. He's nowhere near that level yet. The guy has 1 passing touchdown over his last 3 weeks combined. But you're starting to see a little bit more of that rushing upside. He's making things happen with his feet. Just last week, 4 carries, 91 yards, and a touchdown. Now, he has no interceptions in 3 straight games, and he needs more weapons. Does he get Elijah Moore back in the offense here this week? That would definitely help give him that safer option. Tampa Bay having some COVID issues there in the secondary, but come on, let's be realistic. Nobody is really risking it with Zach Wilson in their fantasy championships here in week 17 of fantasy football. Now we head out to Washington for the football team and the Eagles, and this is a rematch of what we just saw a couple weeks ago in week 15, and in that game, Jalen Hurts didn't do too bad whatsoever. In fact, ever since coming back from his high ankle sprain, in my opinion, he's been a more well-rounded quarterback overall, and he's taken huge strides in the passing game. He's not running the ball immediately and scrambling outside the pocket. He's letting the passing routes develop down the field, and he's making good decisions. Now, in a matchup again against Washington, they allow over 25 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's the most in the NFL. Jalen Hurts was already a quote-unquote safer start anyway. In a matchup like this, he's definitely going to remain a start. As for Taylor Heinicke, dude in a funk right now. He hasn't thrown for over 200 yards in the month and has just as many touchdowns as he does interceptions over that same span. Plus, the Philly D isn't half bad. They haven't allowed over 215 yards passing since week 9. This is just way too risky at this point of the season. Going to sit Taylor Heinicke. Over to Baltimore for the Ravens and the Rams. And does Lamar Jackson return? I mean, as of right now, he's trending in the right direction. We need to see him really back on the practice field consistently to make sure we see him here this week, because Baltimore, they need to continue to win ball games, and they could definitely use Lamar Jackson. Now, the Rams, not the easiest opponent, right? They're allowing right around 17 fantasy points per game. But Lamar in a must-win situation at home is something that I would kind of like to have in my fantasy lineups if he's healthy. Now, I'm not going to risk it with Tyler Huntley or Josh Johnson. If they're the starters, there's just too many other safer options, in my opinion, this week due to the matchups. Now, for the Rams, we had Matthew Stafford with a bad game just this last week, right? But LA can't slow down either. They need to keep winning ball games as well. They should have all their weapons there and available, and Baltimore allows over 19 fantasy points per game, and we just saw Joe Burrow throw for over 500 yards against them. We're going to start ourselves some Matthew Stafford this week. Back across the country we go for the Chargers and the Broncos, and we know we never ever sit Herbie, right? Justin Herbert is a mainstay in your fantasy lineup, even though he's going against a pretty solid Denver defense. These two just faced off in week 12 in Denver, and Herbert threw for 303 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and had 23 fantasy points. Plus, he could have all of his weapons back this week, including Austin Eckler, and he's definitely a guy that you're going to start regardless on a weekly basis. He's not somebody that you can afford to bench here at this point of the season. He's going to be a start. As for Denver, not a snowball's chance in hell. I mean, we know Nick Fangio isn't a huge fan of Drew Lock, but it sounds like Drew Lock is going to be back under center. Even if it wasn't, even if it was Teddy B, he'd had his own struggles prior to getting injured, so he wouldn't have been an option either. The Chargers allow right around 18 fantasy points per game and should have a lot of players back off the COVID list here this week. I'm not risking it here. I don't care who starts in Denver. They're going to be in the sit column. All right, but now we head up to San Francisco for the Niners and Houston, and I got to give some props to Davis Mills, right? Give the guy some credit, put some respect on his name. He's played well here the past couple weeks. He's had 18 fantasy points in back-to-back games, and just last week completed over 77% of his passes. With all that being said, though, no, I'm not going to start him this week in week 17. Those last 2 matchups were against Jacksonville and the Chargers, and we know they give up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks and have had their own COVID issues to speak of. San Francisco is also much better against opposing quarterbacks. I'm not going to get this far in my fantasy season and then rely on anybody in Houston. He's going to be a sit. For San Francisco, is it Trey Lance time? Well, we know Jimmy G is suffering from that thumb injury, but at the time of this recording, he has not been ruled out. He has a chance to play this week. If he does go, I'm not risking it. I don't want to start a player that I know is hurt and then have him go out there, play a series or 2 and not be able to continue. That's just too much risk. So what about Trey Lance? What if he starts his second NFL start? The first start wasn't the greatest, 192 yards passing, no touchdowns, 1 interception through the air, had 16 carries for 89 yards, which really helped boost up his floor a little bit, but he only scored 13 fantasy points. However, did not have George Kittle in that matchup. Now, he's going up against the Houston Texans, who allow right around 18 fantasy points per game, but in my opinion, there are much safer options out there. Trey Lance is a clear-cut boom or bust play here this week if he starts. With all the other great options in fantasy football at the quarterback position, I'm not willing to risk it here. I'm playing it safe and sitting both quarterbacks in San Francisco. Now we head over to Dallas, though, for the Cowboys and the Cardinals. We have two teams that have already clinched their playoff spot, but they need some momentum heading into the playoffs. Dak and Kyler are weekly must-starts in fantasy football due to their huge ceilings. Now, I don't expect the quarterbacks to be rested at all here this week. Like I said, they need to start to gain some momentum. Arizona's been struggling. Dak's trying to build off the momentum from last week and really get into the playoffs with the offense clicking on all cylinders. Now, both teams allow right around 16 fantasy points per game, solid defenses, but you just don't sit your studs at this point. Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, top 5 options every single week, and they're going to remain starts. So now we'll head over to New Orleans for the Panthers and the Saints, and this may be the two worst quarterback situations in the NFL. You have Matt Rule and the Carolina Panthers. They can't decide who they want to play quarterback. They've come out and said, hey, Sam Darnold's going to be our starter this week. So, I mean, flavor of the week, I guess this week, there's no consistency in this offense, and it's absolutely disgusting. None of these guys are going to be starts in Carolina. And then in New Orleans, you can't keep anybody healthy and on the field under center there as well. There's just no consistency. They're going up against the Carolina Panthers, who actually aren't that bad against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 16 fantasy points per game. I'm not going to even touch this matchup here at the quarterback position. Everyone in Carolina and New Orleans finding themselves in the sit column. But now we head up to Seattle for the Detroit Lions, Seattle Seahawks. And how do you not start Russell Wilson at this point of the season against the Detroit Lions? He's had at least 2 passing touchdowns in 4 of his last 5 games played. And Detroit allows over 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But that's not really the reasons why I want to start Russell Wilson this week. It's the fact that Detroit's actually playing a little bit better. Why they decided to wait until the end of the season to play better football in Detroit, I don't understand, but they're starting to score points, and that can force Russ to have to throw the ball more throughout this game, so he's going to remain a start. For Detroit, do we see Jared Goff come back? Do we risk it if Jared Goff does play? I mean, he was playing well prior to the COVID list. He had 2+ passing touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games played, and Seattle allows over 18 fantasy points per game themselves. Plus, now all of a sudden, Amon-Ra St. Brown looking like a bad dude. What about DeAndre Swift? Does he actually return this week? Now, no way is Jared Goff, if he starts, a top 12 guy. He's more of a last resort. I can't imagine you needing him this week whatsoever. Do I think that he can hit 18 fantasy points? I think that he kind of could here this week if he's 100% healthy. So if Goff is healthy heading into this game, maybe you're looking for a quarterback 2. I would start Jared Goff in that situation. He's not going to be somebody who's super high in my rankings, though. He's going to be further down because just due to the risk alone of playing for the Detroit Lions. Which takes us over to Green Bay for the Packers and Vikings, and a couple of easy ones here, right? I mean, 2 of the safer weekly options at the quarterback position. You got Aaron Rodgers out there playing lights out. Has had at least 3 passing touchdowns now in 3 straight ball games and only has 1 interception since week 6. Minnesota allows right around 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So yeah, even though Green Bay has clinched their playoff spot, you're not going to sit Aaron Rodgers here this week. Week 18, that could be a different story, so that's something we'll pay attention to next week. But this week, still firing up Aaron Rodgers. Same can kind of be said to an extent for Kirk Cousins. He's been pretty consistent. Week 16 was the first week in which he only had 1 touchdown in the game since week 8. He should have Dalvin Cook back this week. He is without Adam Thielen, but KJ Osborne has been a serviceable wide receiver too in that offense at the time that we've missed Thielen already this season, so I'm not too concerned. Green Bay only allows right around 17 fantasy points per game, so I'm going to fire up and start Kirk Cousins here once again this week as well. Which leaves us with the last game of the week, the Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers, and there is just no way I can trust Baker Mayfield or Big Ben Roethlisberger in a situation like this. Baker has more interceptions than touchdowns over his last couple games played, and Ben only has 1 touchdown over the last 2 weeks. Both teams allow right around 17 fantasy points per game, but their floors for both of these guys are like 5 points, and I'm not willing to take that risk. It's going to be a fun divisional matchup to watch, just not somebody that I'm going to consider starting here this week in fantasy football. All right, but those are my quarterback starts and sits for week 17 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to help make a few decisions. Our ranking shows will still be out on Thursday, so you'll have those available to you if you need to make some last minute decisions. I want to make sure I throw this reminder out there. If we've helped you at all this year, if we've made you laugh, if we've entertained you, if you've enjoyed this channel, this community, and you're looking to help support us here throughout the offseason, remember, January through July, not a whole lot of people watching fantasy football videos, and we work for peanuts around here. So if you're looking to help support the channel, do us a favor, hit that join button below. It's only $4.99 a month. It greatly helps out the channel. You get some cool emojis and some awesome bonus content throughout the off season that will put you one step ahead of your competition. So make sure you check that out if you can. But hopefully you guys are having a great day. Good luck this week in your fantasy football playoffs, in your championships, and make sure you leave us comments down below when you walk away with the trophy. Looking forward to seeing those comments as well. But hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.